At my beloved husband's funeral, my son and his wife demanded I sign over our home, planning to dump me in a senior facility. They thought my grief made me weak. I just smiled, then pulled out Arthur's last letter. Their faces dropped as his words exposed their betrayal. You won't believe what happened next. Like, share. And let me know where you're listening from. The earth felt impossibly heavy as it thudded against the casket, each sound a fresh stab in Eleanor's heart. Her beloved Arthur, gone. The world had lost its anchor, and she felt adrift in a vast, cold ocean of grief. The crisp autumn air did little to clear the fog of sorrow that enveloped her, making everything feel surreal, like a morbid dream she couldn't wake from. She watched the last handfuls of soil disappear into the grave, her hand clutching the black lace of her dress, her knuckles white. She was numb, a void where her laughter and joy once resided. As the small gathering began to disperse, a shadow fell over her. Eleanor looked up, her vision still blurry from unshed tears, to see her son, Daniel, and his wife, Vivian, approaching. Behind them stood two stern-faced men in impeccable, expensive suits, their presence starkly out of place amidst the quiet solemnity of the graveyard. Mr. Davison and Mr. Holloway, she recalled from Daniel's brief, hurried introduction earlier. Lawyers, Daniel had said. Here to finalize things. Even in her grief-stricken state, a tiny prickle of unease had registered. Vivian, ever the performer, offered a saccharine smile and a pat on Eleanor's arm. "Oh, Mother Eleanor," she cooed, her voice dripping with an artificial sympathy that grated on Eleanor's raw nerves. "We are all so sorry for your loss. Arthur was... he was a man." Her eyes, however, held a calculating glint that spoke of anything but genuine sorrow. "Which is why," she continued, her tone shifting with alarming abruptness, "it's so important we get these inheritance documents signed today. Right away, while everything is fresh." Eleanor blinked, processing the outrageous suggestion. Today? Arthur wasn't even fully laid to rest, and they were talking about paperwork? The sheer audacity of it left her momentarily speechless. She looked at Daniel, hoping for some sign of his father's gentle sensibility, some shred of the loving son she had raised. Instead, she found his gaze hard, his jaw set. A flicker of memory, sharp and poignant, cut through her grief. She saw a young Daniel, no older than 5, running through their garden, chasing butterflies, his face lit with innocent joy. He would bring her wilting dandelions, presenting them like precious jewels, his eyes full of adoration. Where had that boy gone? How had he transformed into this cold, impatient man, standing beside a woman who barely bothered to conceal her avarice? The pain of his perceived betrayal was almost as sharp as the grief for Arthur. "Mother, honestly," Daniel interjected, a patronizing sigh escaping his lips. "You're already old. What do you need? With all that money? The house?" Dad restructured things to make it easier for me to manage. He emphasized the me with a possessive arrogance that made Eleanor's stomach churn. "He wanted you to be cared for, appropriately, of course." The words old and cared for hung in the air, coated in a thick layer of condescension. Mr. Davison, a man with thin lips and eyes that seemed to constantly assess, stepped forward. He held a leather portfolio, from which he produced several official-looking documents. "Mrs. Vance, we represent Davison and Associates," he stated, his voice smooth and devoid of emotion. "Your late husband, Arthur Vance, recently revised his will. All major assets, including the estate and his business holdings, are to be transferred to your son, Daniel. Provisions have, of course, been made for your continued well-being." He gestured vaguely, as if discussing an inconvenient necessity. Eleanor felt a wave of nausea. Revised will? Arthur? Never. They had discussed their future countless times, their golden years, the legacy they wished to leave for their grandchildren. Not Daniel. Arthur had meticulously planned their finances, ensuring her security, their home, their life together. He would never, ever betray their agreement, their partnership. The very thought was an insult to his memory. a slander against the man she had loved for over 50 years. "A lovely senior community has an opening," Vivian chirped, her voice falsely bright, completely oblivious or uncaring of Eleanor's distress. "It's so peaceful. Think of it as a place to relax. You wouldn't have to worry about the house anymore." Her eyes swept across the distant hills where Eleanor's cherished home, filled with a lifetime of memories with Arthur, stood sentinel. "Honestly, Mother, this old place is just too much for you now. It's practically a warehouse. A warehouse. Her home, their sanctuary, reduced to a mere storage facility in Vivian's mercenary mind." A cold fury began to simmer beneath Eleanor's grief. This wasn't just about money. It was about erasing Arthur's memory, about dismissing her existence, all on the day they laid him to rest. "I need to see these documents," Eleanor stated, her voice surprisingly steady despite the tremor in her hands. "And I will need my attorney to review them," Vivian scoffed. A short, sharp sound. "Oh, you don't need an attorney, Mother Eleanor. It's all straightforward. Just a few signatures to make everything official. It's what Arthur wanted." She pushed a pen into Eleanor's hand, its cold metal a stark contrast to the warmth of Arthur's hand that had so often rested in hers. Feeling utterly disrespected, cornered, and diminished on the most heartbreaking day of her life, Eleanor's fingers tightened around the pen, not in compliance, but in defiance. Her eyes, which had been clouded by tears, cleared with a sudden, steely resolve. Slowly, deliberately, she reached into her black leather purse, her fingers closed around a cream-colored envelope, its edges slightly worn. Arthur's familiar, elegant handwriting graced the front, a message that now seemed to whisper directly to her. "For Nellie, when the vultures circle." A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched Eleanor's lips, a grim acknowledgement of Arthur's foresight, his eternal vigilance, even in death. Daniel's brow furrowed, his eyes narrowing suspiciously on the envelope. Vivian, usually so composed, stiffened, a flicker of genuine apprehension crossing her face. The smooth, practiced smiles of Mr. Davison and Mr. Holloway faltered. The quiet graveyard, moments ago a tableau of sorrow, now hummed with an unspoken tension. Eleanor unfolded the letter, its crisp paper rustling softly in the still air. She began to read, her voice clear, each word a stone dropping into the sudden silence. "My dearest Nellie," she read, her voice trembling slightly at the familiar endearment. "If you are reading this, it means my worst fears have materialized, and the vultures are indeed circling. I knew Daniel and Vivian had grown avaricious. They have always been too eager to pry into our affairs. I've been aware of their attempts to undermine our joint estate planning. Therefore, any documents presented to you today, especially by a firm called Davison and Associates, are fraudulent. I never worked with such a firm, nor did I ever revise my will to exclude you or our shared agreements." As Eleanor continued reading, the carefully constructed facade around Daniel and Vivian began to crumble. "I have," she enunciated, her gaze sweeping over the pale faces before her, "been working with a private investigator for the past 6 months, documenting everything." The effect was instantaneous and dramatic. Mr. Davison and Mr. Holloway, who had been standing rigidly, began to back away, their eyes darting nervously towards the cemetery gate. Daniel, who had gone ashen white, let out a choked sound, his knees buckling. He crumpled to the damp grass, a pathetic heap beside his father's freshly dug grave, his face contorted in a silent scream of despair and shock. Vivian, meanwhile, stared at Eleanor, her calculating eyes now wide with genuine terror, a silent acknowledgement of their catastrophic miscalculation, their entire scheme unraveled by a dead man's foresight and a grieving woman's quiet strength. The air, already heavy with the scent of damp earth and wilting flowers, now crackled with a different kind of electricity. Mr. Davison and Mr. Holloway, those two impeccably suited vultures, didn't even bother with a proper goodbye. They simply melted away, their hurried retreat bordering on a sprint, vanishing into the sparse crowd of departing mourners. A few steps later, Eleanor noticed a cheap, smudged business card fluttering to the ground where Mr. Davison had stood, A flimsy piece of paper with a generic law firm name and a number that Eleanor instantly knew would be disconnected. Daniel lay sprawled on the grass, a crumpled suit jacket amidst the fallen leaves. Vivian, for the first time since Eleanor had known her, seemed genuinely distraught. Her perfectly styled hair was slightly disheveled from running her hands through it, and her carefully constructed composure had shattered. She knelt beside Daniel, patting his cheek with frantic, ineffectual taps. "Daniel! Daniel, darling, wake up! What was that? What else did your father say?" Her voice was a sharp whisper, laced with barely contained panic. The mask had completely fallen. Daniel groaned, his eyes fluttering open to reveal a glazed, unfocused stare. He pushed himself up slowly, his movements clumsy, a dazed animal caught in a trap. He looked at Eleanor, then at Vivian, then back at Eleanor, as if trying to piece together the fractured reality around him. "What else?" Vivian demanded again, her voice rising in urgency as Daniel slowly came to. She turned her wild gaze to Eleanor, her eyes darting between Eleanor's calm face and the still open letter in her hand. "What else did Arthur write?" "Tell us!" Eleanor, her own heart still aching with grief, felt a surge of strength she hadn't known she possessed. The pain of Arthur's loss was immense, but the brazen disrespect and cruel betrayal of her son and daughter-in-law had ignited a cold fire within her. "Perhaps," she suggested, her voice steady and quiet, a stark contrast to Vivian's rising hysteria. "We should all sit down. There's no need to cause a scene here. At Arthur's graveside, we can discuss this properly." Her gaze swept over Daniel, who was now slowly pulling himself upright, leaning heavily on Vivian. They made their way to a nearby bench, sheltered by a sprawling oak tree, its leaves rustling softly as if whispering secrets. Daniel, though still pale and visibly shaken, had regained a semblance of his usual guarded demeanor. "Father mentioned a private investigator," he said, his voice hoarse, attempting to sound authoritative despite the tremor in his hands. "What did he mean by that, Mother?" Eleanor sighed, a deep, sorrowful sound that held both grief and exasperation. "Arthur was many things, Daniel, but naive was never one of them, especially when it came to protecting those he loved and our life together." She looked at her son, a profound sadness in her eyes. He saw things, he noticed details, and he knew when something wasn't right. She paused, letting her words sink in, watching the fear etched on Vivian's face. From the cream-colored envelope, Eleanor carefully extracted a second sheet of paper. It was a folded piece of stationery, covered in Arthur's neat, precise handwriting, a testament to his meticulous nature. Here were not mere accusations, but observations, dates, times, and brief, pointed notes. It was a chronicle of betrayal, carefully documented. "Arthur kept very detailed notes," Eleanor began, her voice calm, almost clinical, as she started to read. "Here, on April 12th, Vivian, you claimed to be staying at Isabel's house for a girls' weekend. Arthur noted that Isabel herself called me that evening from her trip to Arizona, complaining about the heat. You were not with her." She looked up, her gaze fixed on Vivian, who now looked like a deer caught in headlights. Vivian spluttered. "That's ridiculous. Arthur was ill. His mind wasn't always lucid." She waved her hands dismissively, attempting to regain control, but her voice cracked. "Arthur's mind," Eleanor countered, her tone unwavering, "was sharp as a tack until his very last days. He may have been physically frail, but his intellect was unimpaired. He knew exactly what he was doing, and why," she continued, flipping through the notes. "There are 16 such occasions documented here. 16 times, Vivian, you told us you were with Isabel when Arthur had independent confirmation that Isabel was out of town, or out of the country, or simply at home alone." Eleanor pressed on, her voice gathering strength. "And Arthur was not content just to observe. He wanted confirmation. He wanted to understand the full extent of what was happening behind our backs. He quietly approached Detective Miller, our neighbor from 2 streets over. You remember Bob Daniel? Retired police detective, very discreet. Arthur hired him, not just to keep an eye on things, as his note says, but to investigate these discrepancies. Daniel flinched, a low gasp escaping him. Detective Miller, a well-respected, no-nonsense man. The implications were chilling. Eleanor turned a page, her finger tracing another entry. Arthur also meticulously tracked our finances, as you know. He specifically flagged a series of unusual credit card statements over the past 8 months, numerous charges for expensive restaurants, places he knew Vivian enjoyed, but always claimed were too far or too rich for family dinners. Several lavish hotel stays. All these dates, coincidentally, align with the days Vivian claimed to be suffering from severe migraines, requiring her to be alone and undisturbed. Vivian's face had gone from pale to an alarming shade of green. "This is a fabrication!" she shrieked, jumping to her feet. Her composure was gone, replaced by raw panic. "This letter, these notes, they're not real. Arthur couldn't have written this." Eleanor slowly tucked Arthur's letter and notes back into the cream-colored envelope. She retrieved her phone from her purse, her movements deliberate and calm, a stark contrast to Vivian's frantic energy. She scrolled through her contacts, found the number she needed, and pressed dial. "Mr. Sterling," Eleanor said into the phone, her voice carrying clearly in the suddenly quiet graveyard. "It's Eleanor Vance. I apologize for calling so soon after everything, but I have Daniel and Vivian here, along with some rather disturbing documents they presented as Arthur's revised will. I believe we need to confirm the authenticity of Arthur's actual last wishes." A pause on the other end, then Mr. Sterling's familiar, steady voice came through the receiver, calm and reassuring. Eleanor put the call on speaker, ensuring Daniel and Vivian could hear every word. "Eleanor, my dear," Mr. Sterling's voice echoed, crisp and clear. "My deepest condolences again. And yes, I understand completely. Let me assure you, Arthur and I last reviewed his will together just 3 months ago. It is meticulously detailed and has remained unchanged for the past 15 years. All marital assets, including the home and the bulk of his business interests, are bequeathed entirely to you as his sole beneficiary. There are no other provisions that supersede this. Any document suggesting otherwise is unequivocally fraudulent." A low moan escaped Daniel. Vivian pressed her hands to her mouth, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and disbelief. "Furthermore," Mr. Sterling continued, his voice taking on a slightly sterner tone, "Arthur, being the insightful man he was, did make certain provisions regarding Daniel's future inheritance. These were established with specific behavioral requirements, extensively discussed between Arthur and myself. Requirements, I might add, that are very much contingent on Daniel upholding the family's integrity and showing due respect and care for you, Eleanor, as his mother." The phone call ended, leaving a deafening silence in its wake, broken only by the distant chirping of birds and the rustling leaves. The silence after Mr. Sterling's pronouncement was absolute, heavy with shattered expectations and dawning dread. His steady, authoritative voice, still echoing in the crisp autumn air from Eleanor's speakerphone, had been like a gavel striking down the flimsy edifice of Daniel and Vivian's lies. "Arthur foresaw this, Eleanor, Mr. Sterling had added, his voice tinged with a blend of admiration for Arthur and concern for Eleanor. "He specifically discussed with me the possibility of his will being challenged or fabricated documents being presented. He took proactive steps to ensure his final wishes, and your security, were ironclad." The call disconnected, leaving a void that Daniel and Vivian scrambled to fill with their escalating panic. Vivian, who had been listening with a face frozen in disbelief, now sprang to her feet. She began to pace frantically, her high heels sinking slightly into the soft earth of the cemetery path. "Why?" she practically shrieked, her voice raw with a desperate indignation. "Why would Arthur? Why would he ever suspect us? His own son. His family. Why would he think we would try to cheat you, Eleanor? It's absurd." Her gaze darted around, searching for an escape, a way to deflect the glaring truth that had just been laid bare. Eleanor watched her, a profound weariness settling over her, yet also a resolute clarity. Her grief for Arthur was still a fresh wound, but the need to honor his memory, to protect his legacy from these vultures, was paramount. "Perhaps," Eleanor said, her voice quiet but piercing, "because you've been cheating on my son for over a year." The words hung in the air, a devastating bombshell. Daniel, who had been slumped on the bench, staring blankly ahead, jolted as if struck by lightning. His head snapped up, his eyes, still glazed with shock from the will's revelation, now widened with a raw, agonizing disbelief. Vivian, caught mid-stride, froze. Her face, which had been contorted in defiance, now cycled through a dizzying array of emotions: shock, outrage, and then, unmistakably, terror. Eleanor reached into the cream-colored envelope once more. This time, she pulled out a sheaf of papers, neatly clipped together. It wasn't just text. It was a collection of printed photographs, interspersed with Arthur's meticulous notes detailing dates, times, and locations. It was a visual diary of Vivian's betrayal, undeniable and damning. "These are from Arthur's personal investigator, Detective Miller," Eleanor explained, her voice devoid of triumph, merely stating facts. "Arthur instructed him to document everything, every discrepancy, every lie. Remember your Tuesday yoga classes, Vivian? The ones you swore were so important for your wellness? Detective Miller's surveillance shows you were consistently at the Grand Hyatt, usually in the company of a man Arthur's notes refer to as Mr. X. And your Thursday book club meetings? The ones you claimed were with a group of lovely women? Detective Miller confirmed that the women you named, when discreetly contacted, had never even heard of you, let alone a book club involving you. Instead, those Thursdays often involved expensive lunches at places like the Gilded Spoon, followed by trips to luxury boutiques." Daniel's face was a mask of utter devastation. He stared at Eleanor, then at Vivian, then at the photographs Eleanor was now carefully fanning out on the bench between them. Images of Vivian, laughing intimately with a dark-haired man, holding hands, entering and exiting hotels. "Mother," Daniel whispered, his voice a barely audible rasp. "What are you saying? What is all this?" The reality of his wife's infidelity, laid bare in such cold, hard evidence, seemed too much for him to comprehend. Eleanor looked at her son, her heart aching for the innocent boy he once was, now reduced to this shattered man. "I am saying, Daniel," she began, her voice softening slightly, "that your father, in his last months on this earth, spent his precious remaining time not resting, but fighting. He fought for me, for our home, for our legacy. He gathered this evidence, meticulously and painfully, to protect me from exactly what unfolded here today. He knew their avarice, he suspected their deceit, and he refused to let them destroy everything he had built." Vivian, her eyes wide and frantic, began to back away, one unsteady step at a time. "No! This is lies! All lies! These pictures can be faked! It's a conspiracy! Arthur was old and confused, and you're just trying to twist things." Her voice was shrill, desperate, a trapped animal's cry. Eleanor remained calm, her gaze unwavering. "Cell phone records. Vivian, do not lie. Credit card receipts, meticulously cross-referenced with your supposed whereabouts, do not lie. And hotel security cameras, often with date and timestamps, most certainly do not lie. Detective Miller has copies of all of it, a full, comprehensive report, detailing every one of your liaisons, every false alibi, every charge." Eleanor rose slowly from the bench, feeling a surge of strength, a quiet power flowing through her veins. It wasn't about revenge, not truly. It was about truth, about justice, about honoring the man she had loved. "Arthur left me more than just the house, Daniel. He left me more than just the money. He left me the truth. He left me the means to defend myself against people like you two, who would pick over his grave before his body was even cold." She patted the cream-colored envelope, still thick with its contents. "And this," she added, a subtle hint in her voice. "This isn't even all of it. There's a thicker piece of paper in here. Something Arthur wanted me to keep very safe." Her eyes met Vivian's, a silent challenge passing between them. The terror on Vivian's face was no longer just about the infidelity or the stolen inheritance. It was something deeper, colder. It was the look of a person whose darkest secret was about to be exposed, a secret far more grave than cheating on her husband. Eleanor felt a chilling certainty wash over her. Arthur had uncovered something far, far worse than just adultery. And it was all tucked away, waiting, in that cream-colored envelope. The first rays of morning sun streamed through the living room window, casting long, warm shadows across the polished floorboards. Eleanor, waking in her own bed, in her own home, felt a profound shift. The crushing weight of grief for Arthur was still present, a constant ache, but the suffocating fear that had often accompanied it was gone. In its place, a quiet strength had blossomed, a sense of clarity, and even possibility. Arthur, in his wisdom and love, had armed her. She was no longer a victim, she was a protector of his legacy. A timid knock at the front door interrupted her quiet morning. Eleanor knew it could only be one person. She opened it to find Daniel standing on the porch, looking utterly bereft. His usually immaculate suit was rumpled, his hair disheveled, and dark circles sagged beneath his eyes. He looked as though he hadn't slept, as though the weight of the previous day's revelations had crushed him. The arrogant, entitled son of yesterday was gone, replaced by a ghost of the boy she once knew, lost and vulnerable. "Mother," he began, his voice hoarse, his gaze avoiding hers. "About Vivian. Is it true? What you said about her? Cheating?" Eleanor stepped aside, inviting him in. "Come in, Daniel. You look like you could use some coffee." She led him into the kitchen, the familiar warmth and scent of brewing coffee a small comfort in the raw morning. As she poured 2 mugs, she spoke softly. "Arthur would never have wished to hurt you directly, Daniel. That's why he gathered the evidence as he did, and entrusted it to me. He wanted the truth to come out, yes, but on my terms, when I was ready to face it, and when it was necessary to protect me." She placed a steaming mug in front of him. "He loved you, despite everything." She then retrieved a manila folder from the top of the refrigerator, a place she had chosen because it was safe yet accessible, a testament to Arthur's methodical nature. Inside were copies of everything Arthur had compiled: photographs, meticulously dated and captioned, detailed credit card statements, phone records, and even notes about surveillance footage locations, all irrefutable evidence. Daniel's hands trembled as he took the folder. He opened it slowly, as if dreading what he would find. The first photograph his eyes fell upon was a devastating blow. Vivian, caught in a passionate kiss with a man Eleanor recognized from Arthur's notes as Mark Jennings, a prominent, married real estate developer. The date beneath the photo corresponded to a weekend Vivian had claimed she was visiting her ailing mother in another state. "Mark Jennings," Daniel murmured, his voice flat, devoid of emotion, as if his system had simply shut down from the shock. "Vivian said he was just a casual acquaintance, a business contact." He looked up at Eleanor, his eyes wide and hollow. "How long?" 14 months, according to Arthur's notes and Detective Miller's findings, Eleanor replied, her voice gentle, understanding the depth of his pain. "It seems to have begun shortly after Arthur's diagnosis, when he became physically weaker. Vivian probably thought he wouldn't notice." Daniel didn't respond, his gaze fixed on the folder. He slowly flipped through more photos. Vivian and Mark laughing over champagne flutes at an exclusive restaurant. Vivian accepting a small, velvet box from Mark outside a high-end jewelry store. Then later, wearing elegant diamond earrings she had claimed were a gift from her sister, Isabel. Each image was a fresh stab, a painful unraveling of the life he thought he knew. "I defended her," Daniel whispered, the words barely audible. "I defended her to you, to my family. I chose her over everything." His voice cracked, and a single tear traced a path down his cheek, followed quickly by another. "I was so blind, so stupid." Eleanor reached across the table and gently covered his trembling hand with hers. "You chose the woman she pretended to be, Daniel, not the woman she actually was. There's a difference." His head bowed, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "How long did you know, Mother? How long did Father know? And you kept silent?" Why? Your father knew for many months, Eleanor explained softly. He was gathering the proof, meticulously. He wanted to spare you the pain, but he knew this information would be vital to protect me when the time came. And I only fully understood the extent of it all yesterday, at his graveside, when I read his letter. She squeezed his hand. You couldn't have known, Daniel. Vivian is very skilled at deception. She played a long, elaborate game. This isn't your fault. As if on cue, Eleanor's phone rang, startling them both. The caller ID displayed Vivian. Daniel's eyes shot up, frantic. Don't answer it, Mother. Please, don't. But Eleanor, her curiosity piqued, pressed the speaker button. She wanted to hear what Vivian, now cornered, would say. Mother Eleanor? Vivian's voice, sickly sweet and dripping with artificial concern, filled the quiet kitchen. It was the same manipulative tone she had used moments before demanding Eleanor sign away her inheritance. Oh, thank goodness you answered. I've been so worried about you. And Daniel, of course, he was so upset yesterday. A pause, then a lowered conspiratorial tone. Look, I think we really need to talk, just the two of us. Privately. To, work something out. Family shouldn't fight, especially not now. Can we have lunch? Perhaps at Cafe Milano? Eleanor felt a cold amusement. Vivian, ever the schemer, still trying to play her game. But now, Eleanor held all the cards. She exchanged a glance with Daniel, who was now listening intently, his grief momentarily forgotten in the face of Vivian's blatant manipulation. Cafe Milano, Eleanor repeated, her voice neutral. Yes, Vivian. I suppose we can do that. She wanted to see how deep Vivian's desperation ran. She wanted to hear what Vivian's something out entailed. Stay tuned to see how this dramatic showdown unfolds. Don't miss a single twist. Like this video, share it with your friends, and hit subscribe so you don't miss the next part of this incredible story. The chic interior of Cafe Milano buzzed with the murmur of polite conversations and the clinking of porcelain. Eleanor sat at a secluded corner table, nursing a cup of black coffee, a deliberate choice. When Vivian arrived, fashionably late as always, she was a vision of carefully curated innocence. Her hair was perfectly coiffed, her makeup understated, and she wore a soft pastel dress that softened her sharp features. She sat down, her smile radiating an almost sickly sweetness. Mother Eleanor, Vivian purred, her voice dripping with an artificial concern that made Eleanor's stomach clench. I'm so glad you agreed to meet. I've already ordered your favorite, a caramel latte with extra whipped cream, right? She gestured to the barista, who placed a towering concoction in front of Eleanor. Eleanor managed a tight smile, knowing full well she despised sweet, frothy drinks, always preferring her coffee black. It was a small, telling detail. Vivian never truly knew her, only the superficial persona she projected. I must apologize for my behavior yesterday, Vivian continued, her voice lowered, laced with a performative remorse. It was just all so much. Arthur's passing, the grief, the worry for Daniel and the children. I wasn't thinking straight. I truly wasn't myself. She wrung her hands slightly, playing the part of the distraught daughter-in-law to perfection. Eleanor merely nodded, allowing Vivian to continue her theatrical display. Vivian then leaned forward, her eyes earnest, her voice dropping to a confidential whisper. But now, Mother, we need to be practical. We need to work together, for Daniel's sake, for the children, their well-being, their future. That's what truly matters. Isn't it? From her designer handbag, Vivian produced a folded paper. Her movements were smooth, practiced. She slid it across the polished marble table towards Eleanor. It was a cashier's check. Eleanor's eyes scanned the amount. $50,000. This, Vivian said, her gaze unwavering, is a gesture of goodwill to help you with any legal expenses, should you decide to pursue these allegations. We don't want to cause any unnecessary pain, do we? Especially for the children. They adore their grandfather, and they need stability now, more than ever. Her voice was soft, persuasive, a silken trap. Eleanor picked up the check. The paper felt surprisingly flimsy for such a large sum. A gesture of goodwill, Eleanor repeated slowly, her voice flat. Or a bribe, Vivian? A payment to ensure I keep silent about your alleged indiscretions? The word alleged dripped with scorn. Vivian's mask slipped, just for a fleeting moment. Her eyes, previously sparkling with feigned sincerity, turned cold and hard, a flash of the viper beneath the velvet glove. Arthur's evidence is nothing but doctored photos and the ramblings of a sick, dying man, she spat, her voice low and venomous. The insult to Arthur, so soon after his burial, struck Eleanor like a physical blow, but she held her composure. With a deliberate, unhurried motion, Eleanor tore the check in half. The crisp sound of the paper ripping echoed in the momentary lull of conversation around them. She then tore it again, into quarters, letting the pieces flutter onto the table beside Vivian's manicured hand. "The truth, Vivian," Eleanor stated, her voice quiet but firm, "is what's best for Daniel. And it's what's best for the children. They deserve to know the truth about their parents. Ugly as it may be." Vivian's face went white, her carefully constructed facade crumbling completely. Her eyes blazed with a raw, unbridled fury. "You stupid old woman," she hissed, abandoning all pretense. "You are making a grave mistake. You have no idea what you're unleashing." Her voice was barely above a whisper, but it vibrated with menace. Then, Vivian leaned across the table, her voice gaining a new, chilling confidence. "You think you're so clever, don't you? With Arthur's little notes and his detective. But you're not the only one who collects evidence, Eleanor. I have been recording every single conversation I've had with Daniel about you for the past 2 years." Eleanor felt a sudden chill, a prickle of unease. "Every word," Vivian continued, a cruel smile twisting her lips. "Every time he complained about you, about your stubbornness, your interference. Every time he agreed that you were a burden. Our plans to put you in a lovely senior community and sell this warehousing of yours? All recorded. His exact words. And guess what? I'm going to play them for him. And for the grandchildren. I'll make sure they hear their father, their beloved son, talking about you with such contempt. I'll make sure Daniel sees just how much his own mother cared for him. He will despise you. The children will be horrified." Vivian sat back, a triumphant glint in her eyes, confident she had finally regained the upper hand. "Now, do you still think the truth is what's best, Eleanor? Or would you prefer to keep your reputation intact? And perhaps—" Eleanor was momentarily frozen, a cold knot forming in her stomach. The depth of Vivian's long-term manipulation, her chilling foresight in meticulously documenting Daniel's unwitting complicity, was a horrifying revelation. It was a brutal reminder of how deeply Vivian had poisoned Daniel's mind against his own mother. The thought of her grandchildren hearing such words, believing her to be the burden Daniel described, was a bitter sting. But then, a memory surfaced. A flash of insight from Arthur's final letter. A small, yet vital detail he had included. A detail that Vivian, in her hubris, had clearly overlooked. Eleanor pushed her chair back, rising slowly, her gaze fixed on Vivian's smug, triumphant face. "Vivian," she said, her voice clear and resonant, cutting through the cafe's gentle hum. "You made 2 fatal mistakes. The first was underestimating Arthur." She paused, letting the weight of Arthur's foresight sink in. "And the second," Eleanor concluded, a faint, resolute smile gracing her lips, "was underestimating me." With that, Eleanor turned and walked away, leaving Vivian sitting alone at the table, surrounded by the torn pieces of her bribe and the empty echoes of her threats, her carefully constructed world teetering on the brink. The Cafe Milano drama faded into a blur as Eleanor returned to the quiet sanctuary of her home. The afternoon sun had dipped below the horizon, casting long, mournful shadows across Arthur's study. She found solace amidst the familiar scent of old books and Arthur's pipe tobacco, surrounded by shared memories. His armchair, still bearing the faint imprint of his presence, seemed to beckon her. Her encounter with Vivian had been a chilling reminder of the depths of human cunning. Vivian's threat of recordings, while momentarily unsettling, had ultimately been undermined by Eleanor's recollection of Arthur's last, most cryptic instruction. He had given her a final, thicker envelope, separate from the one containing the initial evidence, marked with his precise handwriting. For Nellie, only if absolutely necessary. It contains everything. With trembling hands, Eleanor retrieved the envelope from its hiding place in the false bottom of Arthur's antique desk drawer. This wasn't just about financial security or even infidelity anymore. It was about understanding the full scope of the darkness that had infiltrated their lives. Inside, she found a single, densely written letter, addressed to her. It was dated just 1 week before his death. His elegant script, a little shakier than usual, but no less determined. "My dearest Nellie," it began. "If you are reading this, it means Vivian has escalated beyond what I had hoped. The initial evidence I gave you was merely the tip of the iceberg, enough to expose her immediate deceptions. But her true nature, and the extent of her influence over Daniel, requires a deeper understanding." Arthur then recounted the precise moment he had realized the true depth of Vivian's toxicity. "It was the day of my chemotherapy appointment, 6 months ago, the one Daniel attended with us. You remember, love? We were in the waiting room, and Daniel stepped outside to take a phone call." Eleanor remembered that day vividly. Arthur had been particularly weak, the chemotherapy taking its toll. Daniel had seemed quiet, tense, more preoccupied with his phone than with his father's condition. She had attributed it to the stress of Arthur's illness, to the pressure of his own work, to a myriad of external factors. She had made excuses for her son, as mothers often do. "I overheard him, Nellie," Arthur's letter continued, each word a fresh stab to Eleanor's heart. Vivian's voice, raised and furious, carried clearly through the slightly ajar door. She was calling him weak, for being at his dying father's side. She demanded to know why he hadn't met her, as planned. She accused him of prioritizing an old man's pity party over her needs. Eleanor felt a wave of nausea. Daniel, at his father's most vulnerable moment, being berated by his wife for attending his chemotherapy. Then came the sentence that made Eleanor gasp, a sound trapped in her throat. "And then, Nellie," Arthur had written, "I heard our son, our Daniel." He apologized to her. He apologized for being with me during my chemotherapy. He promised her it wouldn't happen again. He said he was only keeping up appearances until I was gone, so they could move forward with their plans. Eleanor dropped the letter, her hands flying to cover her mouth. The sheer, gut-wrenching betrayal was almost unbearable. While she had been fighting for Arthur's life, holding his hand, offering him strength and comfort, Daniel had been counting the days, feigning concern, just keeping up appearances. The pain of Arthur's illness was compounded by the agony of realizing their son had become a stranger, a callous, calculating individual poisoned by his wife. Arthur's letter continued, explaining his realization. "It was then I understood. Vivian hadn't just seduced Daniel. She had systematically poisoned his mind, turned him against us, against everything we stood for. She had twisted his love into resentment, his loyalty into a facade. He wasn't just a victim of her charms, he was a co-conspirator, eagerly awaiting my death for their plans to materialize." That night, Arthur wrote. He had called Detective Miller. His resolve hardened. He hadn't just needed to protect Eleanor from Vivian's financial schemes, he needed to understand the full extent of Vivian's influence, because Daniel, too, was a victim, albeit one who had willingly walked into the trap. Detective Miller's investigation went deeper, Nellie, Arthur's letter revealed. It uncovered a pattern of insidious manipulation. Vivian had systematically isolated Daniel from his old friends, subtly undermining his relationships with his colleagues, even discouraging his involvement in the children's school activities where he might interact with other parents. She would subtly imply that these people were jealous of his success or holding him back from his true potential. She convinced him that his own family, Eleanor, was a burden, a drain on his resources and ambition. She had created an echo chamber where only her voice mattered, where he was reliant on her for validation and direction. Eleanor felt sick to her stomach. It wasn't just about money, or even about infidelity. It was about the slow, deliberate destruction of her son, twisted and corrupted by a woman who saw him only as a means to an end. Arthur, in his final days, had witnessed this chilling transformation, and had, with aching heart, meticulously documented it. Not just for Eleanor's protection, but as a desperate plea to save his son from the web of deceit Vivian had spun, Eleanor picked up Arthur's letter again, her hands still shaking. The revelations about Daniel's betrayal, his callous disregard for his dying father, had been a brutal blow. But Arthur's words hinted at something even more sinister. He had warned her that Vivian's true nature ran deeper. 3 weeks into Detective Miller's investigation, Arthur had written, his steady script conveying a chilling sense of urgency. He discovered financial discrepancies that went far beyond mere infidelity. Vivian was spending exorbitantly, far more than Daniel's legitimate salary could ever support. She had hidden credit cards, a separate bank account I knew nothing about, and a collection of expensive jewelry she falsely claimed were gifts from her own family or from Daniel. Eleanor's breath hitched. She had always suspected Vivian was extravagant. But this was a different league entirely. Arthur's next sentence, however, ripped through the last vestiges of her comprehension, exposing a truth so dark it felt like a physical blow. "Nellie, my love, the truth is far worse than I imagined," Arthur's letter continued. "Vivian has been systematically stealing from Daniel. Over $200,000, siphoned from his business accounts over the past 2 years. She used his business credit cards for personal expenses, forged his signature on lines of credit, and even took out a second mortgage on their house without his knowledge." Eleanor clutched the letter, her knuckles white. $200,000, a second mortgage. Vivian wasn't just cheating on Daniel. She was robbing him blind, systematically stripping him of his financial stability. His future, the woman who had pretended to care for Daniel, who had isolated him from his family and friends, was meticulously dismantling his life, piece by piece. Eleanor took deep, shuddering breaths, trying to process the enormity of the betrayal, the sheer audacity of Vivian's grand scheme. Arthur's investigation had gone even further. Detective Miller discovered that Vivian was funneling these stolen funds into various offshore accounts that Mark Jennings had helped her set up. Their plan, it seems, was always to disappear together once she had gained access to my estate. My death wasn't just a convenience for them. It was the final trigger for their escape. The horror deepened. Vivian and Mark Jennings weren't just having an affair. They were a criminal enterprise, preying on Daniel and the Vance family wealth. But Arthur, in his infinite wisdom, hadn't stopped there. More disturbingly, "Nellie," the letter continued, "this is not Vivian's first time." Detective Miller uncovered a pattern. Before Daniel, she was married to a man named Victor Chang. She financially ruined him, much in the same way she has been doing to Daniel, and then disappeared with his business partner, leaving Victor bankrupt and utterly destroyed. Eleanor's mind reeled. A professional predator. And before Victor Chang, Arthur's hand shook slightly in his writing. She was engaged to a wealthy widower in Seattle, a man who, after a whirlwind romance, died under suspicious circumstances, leaving her a substantial inheritance that mysteriously vanished within months. Eleanor dropped the letter again. This wasn't just a scorned daughter-in-law or a greedy woman. Vivian was a sociopath, a con artist who made a living by methodically destroying men's lives, leaving a trail of financial and emotional ruin in her wake. Arthur was suggesting, with terrifying clarity, that Vivian might even be involved in murder. Arthur had compiled all the evidence: bank records, forged documents, incriminating emails between Vivian and Jennings, and critically, Nellie, a recording of Vivian discussing, with shocking nonchalance, how easy it would be to contest my will, to claim I was mentally incompetent in my final days. This, she believed, would allow Daniel to gain control of my assets directly, bypassing you. Then, once Daniel had control, she planned to liquidate everything and vanish with Mark. Eleanor understood now. Vivian's ultimate fear, the one that had turned her face white in the cafe, wasn't just about the affair. It was the recording, The undeniable proof of her cold, calculated plan to declare Arthur unfit, seize his wealth, and then disappear. It was the linchpin of her entire grand scheme. The final pages of Arthur's letter detailed instructions. I've placed copies of all this evidence, along with a detailed timeline, in a safety deposit box at the First National Bank, account number 734567890. It is addressed to the FBI Financial Crimes Division. There is also a secondary, smaller envelope for you, Nellie, with instructions on how to proceed should this information become necessary. You will know when. Eleanor finished reading, her mind numb with the sheer magnitude of Vivian's deceit and Arthur's foresight. Just as she laid the letter down, her phone rang. It was Daniel. His voice, when she answered, was broken, choked with sobs. "Mother," he wailed, his voice raw with despair. "She's gone! Vivian's gone! She took Chloe and Leo. Mother, she just took them and left. Our bank accounts are empty. Every penny. She cleaned them out. There's a note. Mother. A note. It says she never loved me. She used me." His voice dissolved into guttural sobs. "How could I have been such a fool, Mother? How could I have been so blind? Can you ever forgive me?" Eleanor closed her eyes, a fresh wave of grief for Arthur washing over her. He had known this too would happen. She looked at Arthur's photograph on the desk, his kind eyes seeming to hold a profound sorrow, a silent understanding. "Daniel," she said, her voice gentle, firm, cutting through his despair. "Come home." Arthur anticipated this too. He left us a path forward. The front door burst open, and Daniel stumbled in, a wreck of a man. In a single day, he seemed to have aged a decade. His eyes were red-rimmed and swollen, his usually neat hair stood on end, and his expensive clothes were creased and stained. He looked utterly broken. He collapsed into Eleanor's arms, his body shaking with uncontrollable sobs. "Mother," he choked out, his voice raw with despair. "I'm so sorry. For everything. For how I treated Father. For how I treated you. I'm so sorry." Eleanor held him tightly, her heart aching for him, for the lost boy she knew was still inside. She gently guided him to Arthur's favorite armchair, the one where Arthur had spent countless hours reading, contemplating, and ultimately, strategizing. She went to the kitchen and returned with a steaming mug of chamomile tea, its calming aroma a small comfort amidst the chaos. Daniel gripped the mug, his hands still trembling. She took them. "Mother," he whispered, his voice hollow, devoid of life. "She left a note saying she wants my business, the house, everything. She says I owe her for 7 years of wasted life. She threatened to disappear with the children if I don't give in." He looked at Eleanor, a desperate plea in his eyes. "What am I going to do?" Eleanor sat opposite him, her gaze unwavering. Arthur knew. Daniel. He anticipated this, too. From the remaining contents of the thick envelope, she extracted another letter, thicker than the previous one, addressed in Arthur's hand. "For Daniel, when he's ready for the whole truth." She handed it to him. Daniel took the letter with trembling fingers, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and hope. He unfolded it slowly and began to read aloud, his voice cracking with emotion. "My dearest Daniel," Arthur's familiar words began, his steadfast love echoing from the grave. "If you are reading this, it means Vivian has revealed her true colors. She is not merely a cheating wife, or even a simple gold digger. She is something much, much more dangerous." As Daniel read, his face cycled through disbelief, horror, and then a chilling, cold rage. Arthur had laid bare Vivian's entire criminal enterprise. The systematic theft of over $200,000 from Daniel's business, the forged signatures, the second mortgage, the offshore accounts. He read about Vivian's history. Her previous husband, Victor Chang, left bankrupt and destroyed. He read about the wealthy widower in Seattle, who died under suspicious circumstances. And then, he read the transcript of Vivian's conversation with Mark Jennings. laughing about Daniel's naivete, mocking his blindness, and confirming her plan to declare Arthur mentally incompetent to gain control of his assets. Daniel slammed the letter down on the table, his face ashen. "She's a monster," he whispered, the words barely audible. "A complete monster. And there's more," Eleanor said gently, retrieving another set of documents from the envelope. Arthur anticipated she would take Chloe and Leo, Daniel, not just as leverage, but as part of her permanent exit strategy. She laid out printed emails, exchanges between Vivian and Mark Jennings, discussing research into name changes, false identities, and forged birth certificates for the children. Vivian had been planning to disappear with Chloe and Leo and Mark, to start a new life, wiping away their pasts as if they never existed. Daniel gasped, a primal sound of raw anguish escaping him. "My children," he choked out, tears streaming down his face. She was going to steal my children permanently. The thought was unfathomable, a betrayal that cut deeper than any financial ruin or marital infidelity. Arthur knew, Eleanor confirmed, her voice filled with a quiet strength. He also retained Rebecca Martinez, a top family law attorney specializing in international child abduction. She has been monitoring Vivian's actions, anticipating this exact move, preparing for it for months. Daniel looked at his mother, horrified. Father knew she was capable of kidnapping? Of taking my own children? Vivian follows a pattern, Daniel, Eleanor explained, her voice steady. Children, for women like her, are often an insurance policy. A way to secure their future, to manipulate, to ensure continued access to resources, even if it means severing them from their rightful parents. Daniel buried his face in his hands, his body racked with sobs. "I'm so sorry, Mother. How could I have been such a fool? I dismissed Father. I sided with her. I let her turn me against you, against him. How can you ever forgive me?" Eleanor knelt beside his chair, taking his trembling hands in hers. "Your father loved you unconditionally, Daniel. He would want you to forgive yourself, just as he forgave you. That's what parents do. He knew you were lost, and he knew he had to protect you, even from yourself, even from the consequences of your own blindness." Just then, Eleanor's phone rang. It was Rebecca Martinez. Eleanor put it on speaker. "Eleanor." Rebecca's voice was crisp and professional, tinged with urgency. "We have a crucial development. Vivian Vance was just arrested at the Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport. She was attempting to withdraw $50,000 from a forged account. Our alert was flagged the moment she tried to access the funds." Daniel looked up, his face a mixture of shock and dawning relief. "She's facing federal charges, Eleanor," Rebecca continued, "for bank fraud, identity theft, and attempted international child abduction. She had purchased plane tickets to Mexico with stolen credit cards. The most important news, however, is that Chloe and Leo are safe. They were in her custody, but are now in protective services. They'll be returned to you, Daniel, within the next few hours." Eleanor watched Daniel's face, a wave of profound relief washing over him. Arthur's foresight, his meticulous planning, had saved his grandchildren. "Arthur," Eleanor explained to Daniel, her voice filled with quiet reverence for her late husband, provided Rebecca with Mark Jennings's travel patterns, Vivian's potential escape routes, even details about their fake passports. He left no stone unturned. Daniel sat in stunned silence, his face streaked with tears, processing the sheer magnitude of Arthur's intricate plan. It wasn't just a defense, it was a rescue mission, a painstakingly crafted strategy to save him from complete financial and emotional destruction, and to retrieve his children from the clutches of a predator. He looked at Eleanor, his eyes filled with a dawning comprehension. "How, Mother? How did Father know all this? How did he plan so thoroughly?" Eleanor picked up Arthur's original letter once more, her fingers tracing his familiar handwriting. "He noticed. Daniel. He always noticed." She read a passage aloud. "My dear Nellie, I began to worry when Daniel stopped coming to Chloe's soccer games, then Leo's school play. He always had an excuse. Too busy, too tired. a new project. But it wasn't just the events, it was the light in his eyes, the connection he had with his children, that slowly dimmed. I realized Vivian wasn't just manipulating his finances. She was systematically separating him from everything he loved, everything that brought him joy, including his own children. She was grooming them, preparing them to be taken, to be leveraged. Daniel listened, his head bowed, the weight of his blindness crashing down on him. "He was right," he whispered. "I was so lost, so utterly blind. I pushed you and Father away. And for what? For a lie." He looked up, his eyes pleading. "How can I ever make this right, Mother?" Eleanor reached for his hand. "You start by forgiving yourself, Daniel. Arthur already forgave you. And then, you rebuild. You start fresh." She presented him with a final, pristine white envelope. "Arthur left this for you." He labeled it, "For Daniel's New Beginning." With trembling hands, Daniel opened it. Inside, nestled beneath a short, handwritten note, was a cashier's check for $100,000. Arthur's note read, "My dearest Daniel, I never lost faith in the man you could be. Free from Vivian's toxic influence. This is a small start. Rebuild your life, protect your children, and remember the love we shared. I always believed in you. Your loving father, Arthur." Daniel stared at the check, then at the note, his eyes welling up again. He thought of everything. He choked out, the tears flowing freely. He thought of love, Mother, and everything else. All this, it just flowed from that. He crumpled the note to his chest, overcome by the profound depth of his father's unwavering love and forgiveness. 6 months later, the kitchen in Eleanor's home buzzed with a joyful, familiar warmth. The smell of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the sweet scent of pancakes. Eleanor, humming softly, expertly flipped another pancake onto a waiting plate. Daniel, looking healthier and lighter than she'd seen him in years, sat at the table, a genuine smile on his face. Chloe and Leo, vibrant and full of laughter, chased each other around the table, their joyful squeals echoing through the house. "The insurance settlement came through this morning, Mother," Daniel announced, his voice filled with newfound optimism. "It covered all of Vivian's theft from my business. I'm restarting my company next month. I'm calling it Morrison Construction, in Dad's honor." Eleanor smiled, a deep satisfaction filling her heart. Arthur would have loved that. Vivian, she learned, was serving her federal sentence. Federal charges for bank fraud, identity theft, child endangerment, and attempted international kidnapping had led to a conviction, with previous victims, including Victor Chang, coming forward to share their stories. Vivian's decade-long pattern of destruction was undeniable. She was in federal prison, ineligible for parole for at least 15 years. David Kellerman, Mark Jennings's real name, had turned state's evidence in exchange for a reduced sentence, and most of the stolen money was being recovered. But the true victory wasn't in the recovered funds or the legal justice. It was in the sound of her grandchildren's laughter, echoing through the home that had once felt so empty. Chloe and Leo, thriving under Daniel's renewed care, were now building a magnificent reading fort in Arthur's old, comfortable recliner. "Grandma," Chloe called out, her voice bright. "Can we read Grandpa Arthur's books inside our fort?" Leo nodded enthusiastically. They hadn't known Arthur long, but through Eleanor's stories, and through his quiet legacy, they had built a relationship with his memory. Eleanor's phone buzzed. It was Rebecca Martinez. "Good news, Eleanor," Rebecca said, her voice cheerful. "The civil settlement against Vivian has been finalized. Nearly $400,000 recovered from her hidden assets." She then outlined Arthur's meticulous instructions for the distribution. 50% to Daniel, 25% to a trust for Chloe and Leo's education, and the remaining 25% to you, Eleanor. Daniel, overhearing the sum, looked overwhelmed. "Mother, I don't deserve this." "After everything," Eleanor shook her head gently. "It's not about deserving, Daniel. It's about Arthur's unwavering faith in you. His love. He wanted to make sure you had every chance to rebuild. Later that afternoon, they stood together at Arthur's grave. The autumn leaves had fallen, making way for the hopeful green shoots of spring. Daniel knelt, placing a small bouquet of Arthur's favorite white roses on the stone. "I'm so sorry, Father," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I let you down. I let Mother down." Eleanor placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "He forgives you, Daniel. He always did." He understood. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Daniel and Eleanor sat on the porch swing, a comfortable silence settling between them. Chloe and Leo were inside, their soft chatter a soothing soundtrack to the quiet. "Did he know, Mother?" Daniel asked softly, looking out at the darkening garden. "Did Arthur know he would save us? Heal our family?" Eleanor smiled, a wistful, knowing expression on her face. "He hoped, and he trusted. He knew we would find our way back to each other, to the love that binds us." She squeezed his hand. "I want to be the father he was to me," Daniel said, his voice filled with renewed determination. "And the son I should have been." Eleanor looked at him, truly seeing him for the first time in years. The genuine warmth in his eyes, the sincere remorse, the budding strength. "You already are, Daniel. You already are." From inside, Chloe's voice drifted out, a small, sleepy cry. "Daddy?" Daniel immediately rose, a newfound urgency in his step, and rushed inside to comfort his daughter. Eleanor watched him go, a profound sense of peace settling over her. Arthur's presence was palpable in the quiet house, in the love that now filled its rooms. His greatest gift, the restoration of their family, was fully realized.